Time now for French Connections, our weekly look at the intricacies of life here in France with Florence Villemino. Florence, great to see you.
Hey, Delano.
This week, we're going to take a step back and look at France on the international stage. For a relatively small country, France does wield a lot of diplomatic power and has so for centuries. In fact, once upon a time, French was considered the language of diplomacy.
It certainly was. It all started in the 17th century under the reign of Louis XIV, when France became the most powerful country in Europe, both militarily and culturally. And pretty soon, French replaced Latin in major treaties. Now, part of it is because at the time, French had a standardized grammar and vocabulary compared to other languages, and this reduced misunderstanding. So it really made it ideal for legal and diplomatic agreements and negotiations, etc. But it's also because at the time, and now as well, the French themselves had the reputation of being quite savvy on the diplomatic front.
La France bénéficie toujours d'une aura politique et diplomatique. C'est un vrai art de la négociation, un art de l'équilibre des forces, défendu par des penseurs de la paix. Donc ce qui véritablement, je crois, élève la diplomatie au niveau d'un art.
But Flo, the use of French as the primary diplomatic language seems to have declined after World War II.
There was a big reshuffle after World War II, and English replaced French as the dominant language of diplomacy, but also of business, culture, science, all sorts of things. French did remain important, though. It is one of the official languages of international organizations like the UN, the EU, NATO, the International Court of Justice. But this decline of the French language actually mirrored a decline of France's influence on the world stage. This was limited, however. The damage was limited thanks to Charles de Gaulle, who played a huge role in shaping France as a global power. He ensured that France was recognized as one of the victorious allies coming out of World War II, and he allowed France to secure one of the 5 permanent seats on the United Nations Security Council. We just saw some footage of that. So France not only has a permanent seat on the council, it also has the veto power that goes with it. And this remains a major factor in France's influence in negotiations and diplomacy today.
Now, something else de Gaulle is also credited with is for pushing France to become a nuclear power, something that has cemented this country's power on the world stage.
That's right. Independent nuclear deterrence is definitely a legacy of de Gaulle's presidency, and it all happened in the 50s and the 60s when he launched France's independent nuclear weapons program that culminated with the first nuclear test in 1960. Now, as controversial as this may be, the fact that France is a nuclear power, that it has a strong military and does not rely on the U.S.'s nuclear umbrella like other European countries. All this really does give France a lot of clout on the international stage. Just listen to de Gaulle at the time.
La France, avec ses moyens et sans outrecuidance, a cru devoir entrer dans la voie qui lui procurera l'armement, il faut bien le dire, nécessaire pour être elle-même.
Now, on the international stage, France is represented by its president, but the Ministry of Foreign Affairs wields a lot of influence, doesn't it?
It certainly does. It's known as the Quai d'Orsay. It's our expression du jour. The Quai d'Orsay is actually a street in Paris that runs along the River Seine, but it's also where the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs has been headquartered since 1853. And so when we talk about the Quai d'Orsay, you're talking about the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Now, about 15,000 people work for the ministry, including 10,000 abroad. And France has about 160 embassies around the world, which makes it have one of the largest diplomatic networks in the world, just behind China and the United States.
Now, Flo, if France matters on the world stage today, it's also because of the power of the EU.
That's right. And Eurosceptics, of course, would beg to differ. But France certainly did play a very important role in the creation of the European Union. And there certainly is strength in numbers because, when you look at France today, it doesn't weigh as much as it once did. It represents only about 1% of the world population, 3% of world GDP. So France has to rely on external things like the EU. Also, it relies on something called la francophonie, which is a union of French-speaking nations, and soft power. You think about cinema, art, music, fashion. Some might argue international news channels, all these soft power things. But what's interesting is, if you look at recent years, France has actually been somewhat losing ground on the international stage. Its image has been degraded, for instance, in former African colonies where it was once a key player. All this has really impacted France's credibility and image, and it begs the question, is France's status dropping? Does France still matter on the world stage?
Yeah, interesting stuff there. Now, in any event, France's ambition on the international stage seems persistent, doesn't it?
It certainly does, and you just have to look at how the French president, Emmanuel Macron, is very active on the diplomatic stage, for instance, trying to perhaps fill a void left by the U.S. president, Donald Trump, for instance, when it comes to Ukraine. And in fact, arguably, France might matter the most when it offers an alternative to the United States. We often talk about the fact that, for instance, France made a mark in 2003 by refusing to participate in the invasion of Iraq, the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq. So perhaps this is really where France's diplomatic leverage lies today, offering, being once also an ally, but also an alternative to superpowers.
Have its own voice. Thank you very much for that. That's all the time we have for French Connections, but you can check out other episodes on our website, france24.com.